The cabin hummed with the low murmur of passengers settling in, the occasional thud of overhead compartments closing, and the crisp voice of a flight attendant reminding everyone to stow their belongings. The scent of recycled air and faint traces of coffee lingered as I slid into my seat, sighing in relief. A long week of work behind me, I was looking forward to nothing more than tuning out the world for the next few hours. Then I felt it, an unmistakable gaze drilling into the side of my face. I turned slightly, catching a pair of narrowed eyes fixed on me from across the aisle. A woman mid-50s with the rigid posture of someone who thrived on authority, sat stiffly in her seat. Her blonde bob was perfectly lacquered in place, lips pursed in a disapproving frown. Next to her, a younger woman, probably her daughter, shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us with the look of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. I offered a polite, tight-lipped smile before turning back to my phone. "Unbelievable," I heard her mutter. I ignored it, assuming it wasn't meant for me. I scrolled through my messages, responding to a few before slipping my phone into my pocket. The final passengers were boarding and soon we'd be in the air. A shadow fell over me as a flight attendant approached, a professional yet wary expression on her face. "Excuse me, sir," she said, voice even. "May I have a word?" Confused, I nodded. "Of course." The blonde woman across the aisle straightened, smug satisfaction flickering across her face. "This passenger," the flight attendant continued, gesturing toward the woman, "has raised some concerns. She says you've been acting suspiciously." I blinked, caught completely off guard. "I'm sorry, what?" The woman sat up, her voice louder now as she addressed the flight attendant directly. "I don't mean to be difficult, but I know when something doesn't feel right." He's been on his phone the whole time, looking around nervously. "I just think, well, given the world we live in, you can never be too careful." The implication hung in the air like a bad smell. My stomach clenched. The flight attendant turned back to me, her expression unreadable. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice calm. "I'm fine. Just waiting for takeoff like everyone else." "See?" The woman gestured dramatically. "He won't even explain himself. What's he hiding?" Several passengers nearby were now watching, some frowning in confusion, others glancing at me, perhaps wondering if they'd missed something. "Ma'am," the flight attendant said, keeping her tone measured, "simply using a phone before takeoff isn't cause for concern." "But his behavior is," she insisted, leaning forward as if she were exposing some great truth. "I saw him checking his bag over and over, like he was making sure something was still there." I clenched my jaw, realizing what she was referring to. "I was checking my charger." "That's it." "Well, I didn't know that," she sniffed. "I was just looking out for everyone's safety." Her daughter groaned quietly beside her. "Mom, please." "No," she snapped. "I will not be made to feel unsafe." The flight attendant sighed, clearly weighing how much patience she had left. "Ma'am, unless there's an actual disturbance, we can't remove someone based on a feeling." The woman's eyes flashed with indignation. "Oh, so we're just supposed to ignore potential threats? That's how disasters happen." A man across the aisle spoke up, irritation lacing his voice. "Lady, he's just sitting there. You're the one causing a scene." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the nearby passengers. Her face reddened, but she doubled down, now speaking as if she were some beacon of logic in a world gone blind. "I know my rights. If I don't feel safe, I have the right to say something." "Yes," the flight attendant said firmly. "And you did. We've looked into it. Now it's time to drop it." But she wasn't done. Not even close. Her arms crossed, her lips pressed so tightly they nearly disappeared. "Fine. If you won't do anything, I'll call security myself." The flight attendant's polite patience was starting to crack. "Ma'am, I strongly advise against that. Making a false report can have consequences." That gave her pause, but only briefly. She turned to her daughter, shaking her head. "This is exactly what's wrong with this country. People are too afraid of being politically correct to act on common sense." Her daughter muttered something under her breath and slouched in her seat, clearly wishing to disappear. I, on the other hand, had remained silent long enough. I turned, locking eyes with the woman, my voice quiet but unwavering. "Do you actually think I've done something wrong, or are you just looking for a reason to make me a problem?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face before she scoffed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." I held her gaze, refusing to let her weasel her way out. "What exactly do you think I'm planning?" She sputtered, grasping for words that wouldn't come. She hadn't expected pushback, certainly not from me. The flight attendant straightened. "All right, that's enough. Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. Ma'am, if you continue to disrupt the flight, I will have to report this to the pilot. The woman stiffened, righteous fury twisting her features. I'm the one being threatened now? Oh, this is rich. Another passenger, an older man a few rows ahead, turned in his seat, exasperated. Lady, if you're so scared, why don't you get off the plane? A few chuckles rippled through the cabin. Her face burned crimson, her composure cracking at the edges. She looked to the flight attendant, expecting backup, but found none. For the first time since this began, she hesitated. I exhaled slowly, keeping my expression neutral, but inside I could feel the tension in the air shifting. She wasn't done fighting. But for the first time she realized, neither was I. The woman's fingers drummed against her armrest, her face a mask of barely contained fury. She had lost the first battle, but I could see it in her eyes, she wasn't done. She was recalculating, deciding on her next move. The flight attendant had stepped away, but she lingered near the front of the cabin, her wary gaze flicking back toward us. The tension in the air was thick, like the static before a storm. Then, as if struck by divine inspiration, the woman straightened, turning to her daughter with exaggerated urgency. I just remembered, she announced loud enough for several rows to hear. I saw him texting before the flight. Something about timing? A few heads turned. The words had been chosen deliberately, carefully calibrated to plant suspicion. The seed was small, but it only needed a little soil to take root. I let out a slow breath through my nose. Are you serious? I am serious, she said, pressing a hand to her chest as if the very idea of dishonesty was offensive to her. And I think security should check his phone. Just to be sure. The flight attendant sighed, stepping forward again. Ma'am, passengers have a right to privacy. Oh, privacy? She scoffed. That's what we're worried about now? Not safety. Her daughter shifted uncomfortably beside her, sinking lower in her seat, but the woman's voice only grew sharper. I don't understand why I'm the bad guy for wanting to make sure nothing happens. Wouldn't you rather be safe than sorry? The murmurs returned, lower this time. Uncertain. A few passengers stole glances at me, assessing. And that was what she wanted. She didn't need proof. She didn't need facts. She only needed doubt. I met her gaze, holding steady. You don't even believe what you're saying, do you? She faltered just for a second but masked it with a huff. Oh, and I suppose you know what I believe? I know you need me to be the bad guy, I said. You need this to be a story where you're the hero. Because the alternative is that you just made all of this up. Her lips parted, the retort forming, but she hesitated. Only for a second, but I caught it. The flight attendant spoke before she could recover. Ma'am, this is the last time I'm going to ask you to stop. If you continue, we'll have no choice but to escalate this further. The woman blinked, clearly thrown by the shift in tone. I'm just trying to be cautious. No, the flight attendant said, sharper now. You're causing a disturbance. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder, and for the first time, the weight of the room turned against her. I saw it in her face, the flicker of realization that maybe, just maybe, she had overplayed her hand. Still, she wasn't ready to let go. She squared her shoulders, clinging to indignation like a life raft. Fine, she said, waving a dismissive hand. If something does happen, don't come crying to me. The tension lingered even as she settled back in her seat, arms crossed, eyes forward. The flight attendant gave me a small nod before returning to the front of the cabin, and the passengers who had been watching turned away one by one. The moment had passed. Or so I thought. Minutes ticked by. The final boarding call was announced, the last few passengers filtering in. The door would be closing soon, locking in whatever atmosphere we had created here. And then, without warning, she hit the call button. The flight attendant returned, weary but composed. Yes, ma'am? The woman leaned forward, her voice lower now, more serious. I need to speak with the pilot. The attendant's jaw tensed. Why? Because this is a safety issue and you clearly don't care. Maybe the captain will. A few passengers groaned audibly. Someone muttered, oh, for God's sake. The flight attendant inhaled slowly through her nose. Ma'am, I will inform the captain of the situation. But if he determines there is no threat, you will need to accept that and remain seated for the duration of the flight. The woman gave a tight-lipped smile. Of course. I watched as the flight attendant walked toward the cockpit, disappearing behind the reinforced door. The woman exhaled, smug once again. I leaned slightly toward her, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You're really willing to push this that far? She didn't even hesitate. You have no idea how far I'm willing to push. Her daughter, who had remained silent up until now, turned to her, voice strained. "Mom, please stop." "Oh, stop?" she snapped, her mask slipping. "You want me to stop? You think I'm just making things up for fun?" The girl flinched but said nothing. The cockpit door opened and the flight attendant returned, followed by a man in uniform. The captain. Conversations died instantly. The woman sat up, smoothing out her blouse, tilting her chin upward as if she had just won a grand victory. The captain approached, hands clasped in front of him. His expression was unreadable. "I understand there's been a concern raised?" "Yes," the woman said immediately, standing as much as the seatbelt allowed. "I know you must get a lot of these complaints, but I have a bad feeling about this." She gestured toward me. "Wouldn't you rather check than be sorry later?" The captain turned to the flight attendant. "What's the situation?" The flight attendant's answer was swift, crisp, and devoid of any embellishment. "The passenger has been sitting quietly. No disturbances. The complaint is entirely based on the woman's feelings." The captain turned to the woman. "Ma'am, if my crew has determined there is no cause for concern, then there is no concern. But I need you to take your seat," he said, voice firm. "If this continues, we will have to remove you from the flight." The word struck like a slap. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked around, searching for allies, but found only disinterested stares and annoyed expressions. Her voice was smaller now, less certain. "I was just trying to help." The captain didn't waver. "Ma'am, sit down." Slowly she sank back into her seat, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. The captain gave me a brief glance, something unreadable in his eyes, before nodding to the flight attendant and returning to the cockpit. The flight attendant lingered a moment longer, then addressed the woman one last time. "If you press that call button again without a real emergency, you will be escorted off." And just like that she turned and walked away. For the first time since this all started, silence settled over our row. The woman didn't look at me. Her daughter exhaled, burying her face in her hands. The plane doors locked. The engines rumbled to life. We were leaving. And she had lost. For now. The plane taxied onto the runway, the hum of the engines growing louder, vibrating through the cabin. The tension should have eased now that takeoff was inevitable, but I could still feel the heat of her glare. She had been silent for the last few minutes, but the energy radiating off her was anything but calm. Her pride had taken a hit. She wasn't used to being ignored, dismissed. People like her thrived on control, on forcing others to bend. And she had lost. For now. The wheels lifted from the tarmac, the slight weightlessness pressing me into my seat as the city shrank beneath us. I turned my head slightly, catching her reflection in the window. Her jaw was set, fingers curled around the armrest in a death grip. If she had any hesitation before, it was gone now. She was going to make this personal. It didn't take long. The moment the seatbelt sign dinged off, she moved. Not abruptly, not enough to draw immediate attention, but deliberately. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, then held it up to her ear. Except, she wasn't calling anyone. She wanted to be heard. "Yes, I'm on the plane now," she said, her voice just loud enough to carry a few rows. "It's been so stressful." A pause, then an exaggerated sigh. "No, I did try to warn them, but you know how people are these days. You can't even say anything without being accused of being paranoid." I stared ahead, forcing my muscles to stay relaxed. She was baiting me, seeing if I'd react. I wouldn't. She continued, eyes flicking toward me as she spoke. "I don't want to be right, but I swear some people just look off, you know?" Another pause. Then quieter, dripping with false concern. "I just hope nothing happens." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't directly accusing me anymore, she was sowing doubt. A whisper campaign designed to fester. But she had made a mistake. Because she wasn't the only one who could play the long game. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone and turned on the front camera. With the smoothest movement I could manage, I angled it just slightly, catching her face in the reflection. Then I hit record. If she wanted to talk, I would let her talk. I watched as her smug expression twisted into confusion when she noticed my phone in my hand. Her eyes darted to the screen, realizing she was in the frame. Her lips parted slightly, the wheels in her head spinning. Then I smiled. Not big. Not obvious. Just enough. Her breath hitched. And suddenly she hung up. For the first time she looked unsure. I slid my phone back into my pocket, letting the silence stretch between us. I wasn't going to confront her. I didn't need to. She knew. She shifted in her seat, arms crossing tight over her chest. Unbelievable, she muttered, though now her voice was lower, controlled. This time I didn't answer. And that silence? It made her squirm. Minutes passed. A flight attendant came by, offering drinks, snacks. Conversations picked up again. The tension dulled, fading into the background noise of the flight. But I wasn't the only one who had noticed. A man across the aisle, the same one who had spoken up earlier, leaned slightly in my direction. He didn't say anything, just gave me a subtle nod of approval. The woman saw it. And it broke her. I could feel it unraveling in real time, the realization that she was losing control. That no one was taking her side. That she had spent so much effort trying to paint herself as the victim, only to be seen as the problem. Her next move was reckless. The flight attendant was making her way back down the aisle when the woman suddenly reached out, grabbing her arm. Not hard, but enough to make the attendant stiffen. I need to make a complaint, she said, her voice sharp but hushed. Asterisk now, asterisk. The flight attendant, now visibly irritated, pulled her arm free. Ma'am, what exactly is the issue? Her eyes flicked to me then back. He's recording me. The attendant's gaze landed on me. Sir? I kept my expression neutral. I recorded myself. She just happened to be talking about me loud enough to be heard. That's not legal, she hissed, her composure cracking further. It absolutely is, I said, keeping my voice calm. I can record anything I want in a public space. Just like how you can talk about me in one. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. Checkmate. The flight attendant sighed. Ma'am, you've been disrupting this flight since boarding. I highly suggest you stop before this escalates further. Her face burned crimson. Oh, so now I'm the problem? The attendant didn't answer. She didn't need to. The woman slumped back into her seat, her entire body rigid. She was boiling, steam practically rising from her ears. But she had no moves left. Or so I thought. Then, with a forced breath, she turned to her daughter. Sweetheart, she said loud enough for me to hear, I'm just trying to protect you. Her daughter, who had been silent for nearly the entire flight, finally snapped. Mom, stop embarrassing yourself. The woman's mouth dropped open. A few snickers rippled through the nearby rows. The daughter turned, meeting my gaze for the first time. There was an apology in her eyes, but also exhaustion. Like she had been through this before. I gave her the smallest nod. And just like that, the last thread of control unraveled. The woman clamped her mouth shut, her face a mask of absolute defeat. She turned away, arms crossed, refusing to look at anyone. For the first time since we boarded, silence truly settled between us. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Because if there was one thing I knew about people like her, it was this. She wasn't done. Not yet. The rest of the flight stretched out in uneasy quiet. The woman beside me was a statue, her arms locked tight across her chest, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Every so often, I caught the slight tremor in her fingers, the twitch of her jaw, telltale signs of a battle waging just beneath the surface. She was stewing, simmering in her own failure, but something in her posture told me she wasn't finished yet. The plane cut through the sky, the occasional jostle of turbulence rippling through the cabin. The hum of conversation had returned, though noticeably quieter near our row, like people were holding their breath, waiting to see if she would break again. The flight attendants continued their service, moving through the aisles with the efficiency of people who had dealt with 1,000 entitled passengers before. I wasn't naive. She had spent too much energy trying to turn the plane against me, too much effort convincing herself she was right. She needed an out, something, anything, to reclaim even a sliver of control. And then, just as I suspected, she made her move. It was subtle at first. A glance toward the front of the cabin. A shift in her seat. Then, with calculated ease, she leaned toward the aisle and lifted her hand to press the call button. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then, asterisk ding, asterisk. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, inhaling through my nose. The flight attendant, the same one who had warned her not to press that button again, turned sharply from where she had been assisting another passenger. I could already see the exasperation in her face before she even opened her mouth. Ma'am, she said, measured but firm, what is it now? The woman exhaled through her nose, forcing a strained, trembling quality into her voice. I don't feel well. The lie was so obvious it was almost insulting. The flight attendant's brows lifted, her patience hanging by a thread. You don't feel well? The woman pressed a hand to her forehead as if the weight of her imaginary ailment was becoming too much to bear. I think I'm having an anxiety attack. Pause. And then, just as I predicted. I don't feel safe sitting next to him. The air in the cabin shifted. Even the passengers who had lost interest before were now turning their heads, watching. The flight attendant's jaw tensed, but she remained professional. "Ma'am, you have been sitting here for hours without issue." "But I do have an issue," the woman insisted, her voice climbing. "I'm not comfortable, and I have a right to feel safe on this flight." I could see what she was doing. She had lost the battle of logic. She had lost the sympathy of the other passengers. So now she was playing the only card she had left, the performance of a vulnerable woman in distress. A victim. The flight attendant, however, was unimpressed. "Ma'am, you were already warned about causing further disruptions." The woman's face contorted. "So you're just going to ignore a medical emergency?" "We take medical emergencies very seriously," the attendant said evenly. "Are you requesting medical assistance upon landing?" That made her hesitate. If she said yes, she would be met by airport medics, questioned about her symptoms, and forced to follow through on this charade in ways she likely hadn't considered. If she said no, she would lose any credibility she was trying to salvage. She had backed herself into a corner. Again. The muscles in her jaw twitched as she swallowed, realizing her mistake. The flight attendant didn't wait. She turned, speaking into the radio clip to her shoulder. "This is Flight 227, requesting ground security to meet us upon landing due to a disruptive passenger." The woman's head snapped up. Asterisk what? Asterisk. "You were warned," the flight attendant said simply, then walked away. The woman stared after her, horror creeping into her features. Her daughter buried her face in her hands. The last 20 minutes of the flight passed in suffocating silence. She didn't speak, didn't look at me. She simply sat there, fists clenched in her lap, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. When the plane touched down, the usual rustling of seatbelts and overhead compartments was overshadowed by something else. A collective tension, the quiet anticipation of a plane full of people who had just witnessed a slow-motion car crash. As soon as the seatbelt sign blinked off, I reached for my bag, standing just as movement at the front of the plane caught my eye. Two uniformed airport security officers stepped inside, scanning the rows. The woman saw them too. Her face went pale. One of the officers spoke to the flight attendant, who nodded in our direction. And then, inevitably, they started toward us. Her hands trembled as she scrambled to unbuckle her seatbelt. This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything." Passengers stepped aside, clearing a path. Some had their phones out, discreetly capturing the moment. The woman's breath quickened as the officers stopped beside her row. "Ma'am," one of them said, firm but not unkind. "We need you to come with us." She let out a disbelieving laugh. "For what?" The flight attendant, now standing nearby, crossed her arms. "For repeatedly disrupting the flight and making false accusations against another passenger." The officers waited. Her gaze darted around, searching for an ally, but all she found were disinterested stares. No one was coming to her defense. Her daughter, voice quiet and exhausted, whispered, "Mom, just go." The betrayal was the final blow. Her entire body sagged, the fight draining out of her. Slowly she stood, her movements jerky and stiff. The officers gestured for her to follow, and she did, wordlessly, her head down, her shoulders hunched. As she passed me, I could feel the anger still burning beneath her skin. She wanted to lash out, to get the last word. But she had none left. She disappeared down the aisle, escorted off the plane as the murmurs began. A few passengers shook their heads, others smirked, but most simply moved on, already reaching for their bags. I grabbed mine, stepping out into the aisle. As I did, the man from earlier, the one who had nodded at me, caught my eye again. "Hey," he said, smirking. "You need a ride? You know, in case she's waiting outside with a bad feeling?" I huffed a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "I think I'll take my chances." I stepped off the plane, the cool air of the terminal hitting my face. The sun was setting outside, streaks of gold and violet stretching across the sky. And as I walked away, one thought lingered in my mind. Some people think they can get away with anything. Until, finally, they can't.